Hey, now it's on. Hello and welcome to the Network Security Podcast. Oh, sorry, wrong intro. So I'm Martin McKeay. I'm Akamai Security Evangelist, recovering QSA. I spent 4 years between TrustWave and Verizon as a QSA, saw several hundred different corporations, and a lot of what you're going to hear today is my view on some of the problems with security based on those observations. I saw a lot of people doing their best job and just not quite being able to do it. And it's not because people are bad, it's because we have some, in my opinion, fundamental flaws in the way we look at security, the way we think about security, which leads to flaws in how we do security. I'm a Twitter troublemaker. I'm on Twitter all the time. Many of you know that. As you saw from the intro, also a security blogger and podcaster, and having a lot of fun doing it. I'm also an unreasonable man. If you know the quote, you'll understand what I mean. But I'll go into that a little bit later. So the agenda today is to talk about the journey of a QSA, from bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just out of QSA training to burnt out, depressed, and really having a different viewpoint of what security is at that point. We'll talk about some of the I'll talk about some of the flawed assumptions I think we're making, and then I'll talk a little bit about what can we do to change things. Oh, I'm sorry. For those of you who haven't had to deal with PCI, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, a QSA is a Qualified Security Assessor. Basically, qualified is in quotes, you can put it in quotes. To become a QSA, you go and you have to supposedly have some experience, you have to have either a degree or some other sort of certification like a CISSP, and you go and take about a week's worth of training on how to read the PCI requirements. Sometimes it feels like your brain got sucked out through your ears, put back in wrong, and then you are sent out into the field to take all of these rules that somebody spent a week explaining to you and try and apply them to one of the most disparate environments you can find. When you're looking at how merchants take credit cards, it depends becomes a QSA's favorite words. Can we do X, Y, and Z in the cloud and still be PCI compliant? It depends. Well, this is how so-and-so did it. If we do it exactly the same way, will we be PCI compliant? It depends. The problem is at that point, everybody does something differently. And until the QSA comes in and actually reviews every single thing, and then goes back and reviews what they've made, the choices they've made before, reviews what other people have said, and still makes mistakes, you don't know if you're going to be PCI compliant with anything you do. It's not a very good job to have because a lot of people come to you with very interesting choices on how they're doing their environment, and they want you to tell them that yes, they're okay. On the other hand, if they're not secure, if you call them on it, they get very upset with you when you say, well, your firewall has not actually been audited in 2 years, and therefore I can't pass you on your PCI assessment. And they don't understand how the rules work. So being a QSA got me the chance, though, to see over the 4 years, probably 100 different companies look at their networks, look at how they do security, and see a lot of the same things happening over and over again. So my thought on our fundamental flaws is not how do we do the technology. It's not what technologies we're using. It really does come down to how are we fundamentally thinking about security. Are we asking the right questions? I think that is actually one of the biggest problems we have is as security professionals, we know what we have been taught, we know what some other people have said, but there really hasn't been enough time for us as a community to come up with a lot of the right questions to even come up with the right answers. We're right next door to a little event that has a buzzword every year. Last year it was APT. I think this year it's mobile security. And we spend our time fighting the fight of the day, not fighting the fight of the year or the decade. We are trying to put out too many fires. And we're making it up as we go along. We really are, as much as we have some very smart people, we have some very good people, we're mostly making it up as we go along and just trying to figure out what works. And the reality is things change too quick for us to actually stay up to date with anything. So let's get into a little bit of the history of computer security. In my way of thinking, the career of IT security really started in 1988. Any of you guys remember this movie? I remember this because this was filmed about a block from where I was working and a couple miles from home, and it was horrible. The film itself, not the filming. Anybody recognize who this is? The Morris worm. This is the guy who wrote the Morris worm, which caused the start of the first U.S. CERT. The Morris worm or the U.S. CERT? Yeah. Okay. This really is where and this is something that people will argue with me, and I have had many arguments about, is this is where I think that security as a career really started, is when that first U.S. CERT was created. That was the first time security went from being one or two people's passion and something that they did to a career path. This is when it became something that you could say, I'm a security expert, my job is security, and these are the guys who really got it started. Maybe there's a lot of companies that had security teams before that, but they were few and far between. It was something you got into because it was a passion. It wasn't really something you could get into by saying, I want to go to college and get a degree and start in security. These guys made a change. It also helped this guy decide to make Tripwire, Gene Kim. Actually, I was hoping to harass him, but he's not here. This is really, like I said, where I think security went from being a few people in high positions being very passionate about what they do and very passionate about the career into a real career anybody could get into. So the problem, I think, as I said earlier, is we are all firefighters. With few exceptions in security, we're dealing with emergency situations. We're dealing with a situation that comes up at the last minute. We're dealing with putting out other people's fires. That's actually one of the biggest problems we have, is putting out other people's fires. But unlike firefighters, we don't have a lot of success stories. We don't have a lot of, this is where my job ended and I did something good. And that's slowly changing, but that's really one of the other problems. So, sorry about that. Dogma. It's a hard word to use, but really we've based almost everything that we're doing in security on somebody else's thinking from the very start. That's how people evolve, that's how people change. But a lot of us, I know when I was in security, and just starting off, it's very like the PCI assessor, where all you have to go on is books written by folks like Bruce Schneier, folks like Adam over here. And you have other people's thinking to base your work on. But the problem is everybody else is making it up just as much as we are. And so many of the people who are coming up in security are just basing what they do, what they think on those previous conversations, on other people's thinking. When you look at a firewall, we all know firewalls don't work. We all know that they are not capable of stopping many of today's threats. But because that's what people have been doing since they were invented, is putting firewalls in place, we keep doing it, we keep having that filter there, even though we know it doesn't work. We do that in so many aspects of computer security that we're just doing it because it's what somebody else did. We're doing it's because it's what we know we won't get fired for. It's like buying IBM used to be. If you put a firewall in place, then they know at least that you've done some of what you have to do. And and therefore you're doing your job. But with the environment changing so fast, with technologies changing so fast, with the aspects of our attackers changing so fast, we can't afford to rely on dogma, to rely on other people's thinking. We have to be forging ahead. Security is not a mature industry that we have the capability of actually relying on what other people have done before us actually working anymore. And that's one of the big problems, is relying on other people's thinking. Wendy Napers likes to call security a teenager. She thinks we're a pimply-faced teenager that's going out into the world, but I actually think we're not even that far along. When you look at any other industry, as I said, if we count from 1988 on, we're only a 25-year-old industry and not even quite that yet. When you look at what we're doing versus, say, something like the automobile industry was doing at 25 years, we have had so much more of an impact on the world than cars had at the same time, with about the same amount of research and what's the word I'm looking for? But with about the same amount of time to actually figure out what we're doing. We're just a fledgling industry, and people forget that a lot. We're new, we're figuring it out as we go, and that is our fundamental flaw number one. It's just that we think we're a mature industry. We're not. We're an industry that is just barely stood on our feet at this point. And I think that, quite frankly, we need to stop pretending that what we do is science at this point, because until we've gotten a lot more information and a lot more time, we're not going to be mature. So the next problem is that, along with being firefighters, security is mom and pop for a lot of corporations. They make decisions that they have to go out and do things, and quite frankly, we're just told whatever we want to do as a business, you have to just support. That actually makes sense, because they're the ones who pay the bills. But when it comes down to it, we can say as much as we want in many cases. And again, this is back to QSA-ville, not everybody. But companies just say, go do this, make it happen, and we have to comply. It's dangerous, because for us, we really want to do that. We really want to make the business succeed, but we don't always have the power to be that brake and make it so that companies aren't doing insecure things or doing dangerous things. We don't have always the ability to tell them to go put on their helmet and pads before they go out and do something. And a lot of times, even when we do, we get ignored. We have sometimes when you're in security, it really the right thing to do is just accept the risk, and we do a lot of that. But again, risk is not something that we have historical data on. One of the things that I did long ago and far away was I was a securities and life insurance licensed professional, and when you're insurance, you have actuarial tables. You have data that in some cases goes back hundreds of years to say what behaviors will lead to what amount of risk. In security, we don't have that. We don't know what the risks are. And even when we do know what they are, they're changing so quickly. Sony is a great example of that. The company as a whole kept saying, yeah, we know you security guys keep telling us there are problems, but we're going to accept the risk, we're going to move on, this isn't going to happen to us. And how many breaches? I think it was 23 breaches that Sony had based on the anonymous attacks and some of the other attacks. 23 different business units that actually got compromised. Oh no, I don't think it was the first time at all. I think that those are just the 23 that we've been told about. I would probably say that there's probably another 23 or more since then, and that we haven't been told about, and you don't know how long-term any of the breaches before or after have been. So. I think Okay, to get off on that tangent for a moment, I think it's like many things that Anonymous does. There were compromises in place and data taken long before they announced it or anybody announced it. There was a lot of the breaches, probably the first 5 breaches had happened long before anybody acknowledged them and announced it. And the other 18 were probably just attacks of opportunity that other people did afterwards. So does that answer your question? And do you think I'm right? Right, but with something like that, the SIM alert wouldn't have probably been even looked at because they didn't have the personnel. I don't know if you're aware of it, but about a month, I think, before the major breach, they actually fired or laid off a large number of their security team for the corporate portion of Sony. And that was actually, I think, instrumental in at least one of the lawsuits against them. So I don't think they would have had the people anyways. Resources is not one of the fundamental flaws. It actually comes from the fundamental flaws. We don't necessarily know what we're doing, so we can't always express it to business leaders to get the funding we need. So the thing is how many of you guys recognize these characters? Alex Hutton is a great guy, and with Wade Baker, with the Verizon business folks, with the data breach investigation report, Alex Hutton actually came to be one of the first, or that report actually became one of the first steps that we've taken along the way of actually getting some actionable statistics. It means that we can actually now start placing some more realistic risk measurements than we've ever had before. But when you look at the data breach investigation report, it's only targeting a super small set of businesses and systems that we know are compromised, and doesn't really explain what's happening on a wider scale. But that is still the height of the data we have at this point. The other guy, Josh Corman, is also my boss, by the way. When I was still a QSA, one of the things that he did was started pointing out to me PCI and some of the issues with PCI, which is that it's not good practices, it's not best practices, it's barely minimal practices at that. And when PCI first came out, you could use it as a lever to get money and to get resources. But more and more, what we're finding is that businesses don't care. They whitewash the QSA, they whitewash the process, make it so that the accounting and other firms sign off, even though there are vulnerabilities, even though that they know that there are problems. It's not working. It's when you look at something like that, it just isn't going to work long term. And so that's why Josh actually pointed out to me in a lot of ways that PCI compliance isn't going to work. Policy, while important, isn't going to work. It really is going to be us thinking about it. What that leads me to is that we're responsible for everything. We think we're responsible for everything. We act like we're responsible for everything. In a lot of cases, that's not true. We've taken that risk on. We've taken that information on. We are not responsible for everything. We are responsible for doing what we can to advise businesses. We're responsible for getting more information. But really, when it comes down to it, that risk equation is a business decision and not necessarily one that we are the best people to make. And that's a hard one. I don't know if there is a cure for that, because we do have a feel of responsibility. We should have a feeling of responsibility for what's happening. As I was saying just a minute ago, we really don't have a lot of evidence. The Verizon data breach investigation report is the height of our evidence. When you're looking at the first one in 2008 or 2009, I think they had less than 100 breaches. When this one was done, they added in some of the, I think it's Sweden, the Swedish police force work. They've added in some of the FBI, but that's still less than 500 cases all told. And this, as I said earlier, is the height of our evidence. So how are we going to have scientific understanding of what we do? How are we going to have some sort of evidence to prove that what we're doing works or doesn't work when we don't have the sharing, we don't have the ability to do it? Quite frankly, even when we're looking at something smaller like a personal network, like a, not personal, like a corporate network, we don't know what's going on. I mean, how many of you have ever sat down across a table to start talking to one of your teams about a project they're working on? You've been working in the security department for a couple of years, you've been in the company for a couple of years, and all of a sudden that team says, oh, by the way, we have this other network over here. I can't count the number of times as a QSA where I started to sit down with people and the security team, the audit team would say, oh yeah, we've got everything straightened away. And then we'd start bringing in the business owners and they would actually say, oh, by the way, here's this other data stream you didn't know about. I think the funniest example of that I actually saw was that I sat down with the team on Monday. I'm walking through everything with them. I'm talking through everything with them. And there's this one little old lady sitting in the back of the room, just kind of smiling as the day goes by. Nothing really big happening. She's just quiet. So a couple of days of this goes by. And on the third day, I think, everybody's talking. It's like, okay, we've been through all of the data streams. We know where all of the data is. I think we're done. And the little lady in the back of the room kind of holds up her hand and says, well, you forgot about the Rolodex on my desk that has every client credit card number on it. She had actually literally for years, the way the business worked was that, yes, there's all this great information in the database, but she actually did most of the entry, most of the credit card taking and using from her desk on that Rolodex, and they had a whole stream of data they just didn't even know existed. The other thing is that even then when we do have the data, a lot of time we ignore it. We were just talking a minute ago about the Sony breach. How many lines of logs do these people get a day? Sony's not a small company. When we look at any of the SIM or other log vendors, we really look at something that's trying to build intelligence into it, but there's not a lot of intelligence into any of it yet. It relies on a human being. The problem is we, as human beings, fundamentally get bored. When we see the same logs flowing by over and over again, it's very easy to get desensitized. But how do you balance that desensitization for a person versus machine intelligence, which may or may not have any real intelligence behind it? Even the best of the SIMs out there don't have a way of actually tying together the information in a way that a human being can. They're getting better, but I think we're still 5 to 10 years away from where the correlation engines actually can match what a reasonable human can do, and we're probably 10 years to 20 years away from matching what a good expert can do with correlation. That may be something that somebody else has more information on. And so instead of actually getting intelligence from logs, most of what we do in a lot of companies is just log it, say somebody actually reviews it, and then walk away. I can remember a number of times of sitting down with people to start talking about log review as a QSA. It's one of the requirements. You've got to do it. Everybody says they have somebody reviewing logs. But then you actually get there in front of them and they're like, oh, yeah, I don't remember how to use the tool, or I've got to go back and find the password, it's in my drawer. And those are extreme cases, obviously, but so often we have the data sources, we just don't necessarily use them. So we've got the three triads. We've got, CIA, we've got respond, prevent, and detect, we've got recognize, resist, react. These are great methods of kind of organizing your thoughts, but none of them really tell us what to do. They give us a way of what we're thinking about. My favorite actually is the recognize, resist, and react, because it really does capture what we're supposed to be doing as a professional. Yeah.
This is going to sound like a really trivial question, but did that graphic come from some of the respond, resist, react from some other document somewhere? Because I've seen that gear design before, and it just bothers every technologist I know because they don't move, which sends really the wrong message.
I don't remember where I got it.
Just curious.
Oh, it's a deep. Okay. By the way, I suck at PowerPoint, so this is.
It's not a criticism of you. That I just wanted to know where that came from.
But the reason why I like recognize, resist, and react is because that really falls into one of our fundamental flaws. We don't necessarily have all the feedback mechanisms in place to do that. We don't do it well. And that leads to the flawed assumption number 3, which is I can keep my company secure. There's been a lot of blog posts about it, but in some ways, we're losing the battle. We are going to lose the battle because we have to be right every time. The bad guys only have to be right once. Which means we are going to lose. We don't necessarily build our networks, we don't necessarily build our systems in such a way that they're going to be resilient. We don't, in a lot of cases, build it in such a way that if there is a compromise, it's going to let us know. And again, there are companies out there that are exceptions, but when I'm looking at the merchant sphere, this really has been one of the biggest problems, is people not learning how to respond and react.
So is it just that the language is wrong? I mean, secure is the wrong word, right? At no point are we securing anything. What we're really doing is managing risk.
Yeah.
So should it not be I can keep my company's risk contained or something?
I can manage my risk. It probably should, but what we as a group look at is we call it security, and so that's what we think we want to do. And really, in a lot of cases, I think you're right. We're actually just identifying risk and managing it as best we can and letting the companies make the decisions. So.
Follow on what you just said. I'm not really aware of any generally accepted definition of secure. It's easy enough to look at specific events and say, well, that's a failure of secure. But as you said, this is a pretty broad statement. I'm not even sure what it means.
Another part of this is that if you look at an allegory for our security, of physical security, they don't say they're secure except in a few cases. They say that they've got these measures in place, and they talk about the risk. And if you talk to somebody who's really deep into physical security, they're going to say a lot of what you just said, that we're not secure, we're not going to be secure, but we're secure enough for our purposes.
We'll say rated in the amount of time it will take with the amount of force or effort to
Right.
evidence that it's been factors.
And we don't have that in IT. I mean, some companies do. I'm not going to say nobody has it, but majority of people don't.
Kind of tied together with the gentleman saying is, if we rephrase this, the assumption is that we're supposed to be keeping our companies secure.
Yeah.
Really that's not what we're supposed to be doing.
But it's what most of us think we're supposed to be doing. And it's what most companies think we're supposed to be doing. They think that we can wave a magic wand and make it so that they're never compromised. And we don't necessarily do a great job of explaining to management what that really means. And on the other hand, we don't always understand it either. I think that you've got a good point. All three of you have got a good point, that the difference between security and managing risk is mostly in your head, and we don't do a good job of separating the two. No. I think we talk about it all the time, and unluckily, it's in such a case that this is what works in my environment, but your environment, even though you may use most of the same equipment, it's going to be different. Therefore, it doesn't work in yours. So, you were going to say?
So saying I can keep my company secure, the way we pitch to management is we can control technology risk appropriate to the data type. That's typically the way we talk. So you tell us the data is important, the system is important, and we'll tell you what you need to do.
Has that been working for you? Because for a lot of places I've seen, what data is important to you? All of it.
Well, yes, but then you show them the cost differences between, okay, so if we make if we just carve out a little secure section for you and put our controls in place, or, you know, we can layer on an entire data center, they see the cost differential, and then they start all of a sudden saying, oh, okay, or, you know, you just throw PCI out there, you know, if we can reduce costs by, you know, 40% if we just, you know, create our own little PCI bubble and put the stuff that doesn't matter as much outside of that. Those are the type of conversations we've been having, and actually they're listening.
I think that we are, this actually is probably of the assumptions, I think this is the one we're actually closest to having some headway on. I think that there are more people like you out there all the time, but I think that in a lot of cases, in a lot of companies, they're still just struggling with getting the message of what security is and understanding what that message is. So my fundamental flaw is we're a mature industry. We are not. We really have a long ways to go. We think we're responsible for everything, and unluckily, that one's a problem because not only do we think it, many of our corporate overlords think that we're responsible for everything as well, that they can do whatever they want and not have to deal with a risk, that we'll just take care of it for them. That one scares me. And then we think that we can keep our companies secure. So what should we do? Challenge everything that you've been taught. We know that things are changing. We keep talking about it every year, but there are fundamentals underneath it that aren't changing. We need to re-examine those quite closely and understand whether or not that still applies, whether or not the rules still apply. They're changing every day, and the people who taught us these rules, who came before us, were making it up just as much as we were. We have to get to a place where we're going from a bunch of ideas that were made up on the fly because we were fighting a fire to actually going back and re-examining much of what we do and whether or not it's really effective. We need to figure out if we can get statistics to figure out what's working or what's not. We find out the hard way what's not working, but we don't have a lot of evidence about what is. This goes back to your point of we have to understand the businesses better. I know that this is one we talk about a lot, but we have to get better at communicating. We have to communicate risk up the chain, and we have to get better at listening to what actually makes the business money. Too many people want to have security for security's sake without understanding what that effect will have on the business. And the last thing is we need to make sure that we know we're going to fail, that we can fail in such a way that it's not going to be catastrophic, and that it's not going to be something that ends the business or our career. Like I say here, detect and respond instead of just having the static controls.
I think there's a point of assumption here, and that is that we are capable of picking the right problems to solve. Because I think a lot of security practices that I'm familiar with choose problems that are easy to solve with tools that they're familiar with, rather than challenging, as you pointed out here. So we have, as an industry, a focus on deploying technology to solve problems because that's easy to quantify and easy to operate. And instead, we have all these unsolved problems that the majority of our peers how you deliver.
And if you go over next door and you think of any problem and go to a vendor, and I'm willing to bet almost every single vendor out there will say, oh, well, here's how we can solve your problem, not ever saying, oh, we don't deal with that problem. Maybe you should go elsewhere, and here's somebody who can help you.
Is that when the only tool you have is a hammer, if you're probably going to something like a nail, we have our toolbox, and maybe we have a couple of different nails or screws or whatever, but you're saying we we basically select the problem based on the tool set we have available.
Yeah.
We are, I feel sometimes that, it's probably cruel here. Most of our peers are unqualified to hold the job they hold. They know technology, they're IT people, they're system administrators who happen to know how to administer a system which has security impact, rather than being security practitioners who really understand the potential.
Well, but you're at BSides, so that shows that you're above average in that you, well, no, I'm not mean, I mean that in that when you're above average, you're actually somebody who is investing in their career enough to actually think about this outside of the 8 to 5 hours. And a lot of the people you're talking about are the 8 to 5ers, the people who are in it because security is a career that looked easy from the outside, looked like it paid very well, and so they moved into it. I used to work for a state agency here in California. Half of their IT and security department was based on having contractors come in because everybody who worked for the state went and gravitated to security and IT because it paid best. And most of them had problems, or not most of them, many of them had problems turning on their computer in the morning, and so they had to have almost literally a second person for every employee that actually did the job. That's a little bit of a exaggeration, but it's not by much. And a lot of companies, we have that sort of personality. And you add to that the fact that we've got almost a negative unemployment rate in security. And so anybody who can say, I do security, is getting hired. That's not a fundamental flaw in security thinking. That's just a fundamental flaw in the world. But that's actually one of the fundamental flaws, is that people think that there is 100% work. It's never going to be 100%. I mean, even if you, an example of that is if you look at spam filters. We probably have more information on spam than we have on almost anything in security. And still, even the best spam filters are 95 to 99, maybe even 99.5 or 9%. But that's still, when you're talking about 70 to 80 or 90% of the internet's email being spam, why can't we do better? Why can't we handle that better? It's a problem. So what else? Establish a measurement for success. This is actually one of the things that we are worst at and that gets us in trouble with our companies and is depressing. I mean, I don't know if any of you were in the stress panel on Monday, but we are constantly fighting the good fight without a measure of saying, hey, I won today. Right now, for most of it, it's a binary, either I was compromised today or I wasn't. And even when we say I wasn't, a lot of times we're saying, well, I don't think I was compromised, but I'm not absolutely sure. So how do we establish that? We have to get more metrics. We have to get more information. We have to be able to say, for certain, are we making that 90% of the risk go away, or are we just putting a Band-Aid on the wound and hoping that we caught everything? And then finally, the last thing is just be unreasonable. Question the assumptions. George Bernard Shaw, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Be unreasonable. Question your assumptions. Question what people are telling you. Question whether you're doing it the right way or not. We have, and being the guy up here speaking, we have huge egos. And I'm one of them. I'm going to tell you, I don't know if these are really the biggest problems. I think that these are some of the fundamental problems, but I hope by having the conversation with folks, we can start looking at some of this and changing the way we think about security, changing the assumptions that we make about what we do, and learn to make a better, more secure, less risky internet and world and corporation. So that's it. Any questions, comments, or you guys can go and get a break. Thank you very much.